The cafe inside the Ward Tower was unlike any other in Manhattan. Its marble floors glimmered like poured light, and every corner smelled faintly of roasted Arabica beans and ambition. The morning rush was the usual blend of exhaustion and expensive suits, a blur of executives clutching phones tighter than they held their consciences. Sophie Grant moved between tables with practiced grace, her tray balanced in one hand, her eyes always scanning, anticipating, adapting. She'd learned early that in places like this, invisibility was both survival and strategy. At 28, Sophie had perfected the art of blending in. Her posture was professional, her smile subtle, her voice calm, a quiet melody in a room full of noise. The regulars barely noticed her name tag anymore, she'd become part of the decor, a dependable presence that required no acknowledgement. Only she knew that beneath that composure was a mind far too restless for routine. Law school hadn't prepared her for serving lattes to billionaires, but life had a cruel sense of irony. The very firm that destroyed her career had its logo printed on the cups she carried every day. That morning, the elevator doors opened with a metallic sigh, and in walked Ethan Ward, the CEO whose name was printed in silver letters 30 floors above. He was younger than most imagined, mid-30s, tall, immaculately dressed, and wrapped in the kind of confidence that only money could afford. People turned when he entered, not because he demanded attention, but because the air itself seemed to rearrange around him. His phone was glued to his hand as always, his voice crisp and commanding as he spoke to someone on the other end. "I don't care what the projections say," he said sharply, pacing toward his usual corner table. "If they want this merger, they sign by noon, or the deal dies." Sophie poured coffee for a table of attorneys pretending to discuss ethics, her attention snagging on Ethan's words. She didn't mean to listen, eavesdropping wasn't her style, but when someone like Ethan Ward spoke about a merger worth billions, even the walls seemed to lean closer. He sat, tapping the table impatiently until she appeared beside him. "Double espresso, no sugar," he said without looking up. "Right away, Mr. Ward." His tone wasn't rude, just distracted, the kind of detachment that came from living in a world where everyone else existed to serve. Sophie returned moments later with his drink, placing it before him with quiet precision. He nodded absently, still deep in conversation. "No, I don't care if the clause looks aggressive. They'll either accept it or lose access to the data network." He glanced at her briefly then, eyes cold but intelligent, the kind of gaze that saw through people instead of into them. She'd seen it before, in courtrooms and conference rooms, long before she was reduced to serving coffee. Back then, she'd been the one negotiating clauses that decided whether companies lived or died. Ethan finished his call, typed something on his phone, and stood. "Keep the change," he said, tossing a few bills on the table. It was more than generous, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. The phone buzzed again as he walked away, and in the rush of movement, he left it behind, a sleek black device gleaming under the soft cafe light. Sophie noticed immediately. "Sir." "Mr. Ward," she called out, but the revolving doors had already swallowed him. She hesitated, glancing at the phone. Company policy was clear, turn lost items into management. But when the screen lit up, everything changed. "Incoming call, legal department, urgent contract approval." The ringtone cut through the low hum of conversation. She should have ignored it. She should have handed it over to the manager and walked away. But something about that word, contract, pulled at the old instincts she'd buried years ago. Before she could stop herself, her hand reached out. The screen flashed again, second call attempt, urgent. Her pulse quickened. She pressed answer. "Mr. Ward?" A man's voice crackled through, impatient and anxious. "Do we have your authorization? The Arcturus deal needs your electronic signature within 10 minutes or it's automatically approved by proxy." Sophie froze. "This isn't Mr. Ward," she said cautiously. The line went silent for a second. Then the man cursed under his breath. "Who is this? Where's Ethan? Look, the contract includes a clause that transfers patent rights to overseas partners. If he doesn't reject it, the company loses its U.S. ownership claim. Do you understand that?" Her heart slammed in her chest. She understood perfectly. That clause wasn't just dangerous, it was a setup. Someone was trying to strip his company of intellectual property under the guise of an expansion deal. The kind of maneuver that destroyed careers and empires alike. Before she could respond, the call disconnected. Sophie stood motionless for several seconds, the world around her blurring into white noise. Then, instinct took over. She scrolled through the contacts, found Ethan's name, and typed a single message. If you sign that Arcturus contract, you lose everything. Clause 9C, jurisdiction transfer. She hit send, set the phone on the counter, and exhaled shakily. She felt as if she'd just defused a bomb, or maybe set one off. Minutes later, her manager appeared, holding the phone like it was radioactive. "Sophie, did you touch this?" I answered a call. It seemed urgent. Urgent? That's Ethan Ward's private line. Are you insane? He ran a hand through his thinning hair, panic creeping in. You could be fired for this, sued even. Hand it over. Now. Sophie obeyed silently, her mind already racing. If she was right about that clause, Ethan had less than an hour before his signature sealed the company's fate. She didn't care about his money or power, but she couldn't stomach the thought of watching another corporate trap play out when she knew exactly how it ended. She finished her shift in a fog of adrenaline and dread. Every clang of porcelain, every burst of laughter from the tables around her, felt distant. The cafe that once felt safe now pulsed with unease. Around noon, the manager approached her again, this time pale. "He's here," he whispered. Ethan Ward stood at the entrance, phone in hand, eyes locked on her. The cafe fell silent. Conversations halted mid-sentence. He crossed the floor with the calm precision of a predator, every step deliberate. When he reached her, his voice was low but edged with steel. "You used my phone." Sophie met his gaze evenly. "It was ringing. I thought it was an emergency. And you sent me this?" He held up the screen. Her message glowed like evidence in a trial. "Who are you to tell me what to sign? I'm someone who recognized a clause designed to ruin you." Her tone was steady, though her stomach churned. "You should thank me." He blinked, startled by her boldness. "You read my contract?" "No," she said sharply. "But I heard enough to know it was drafted by Arcturus Legal. They've used that same jurisdiction transfer clause in at least 3 fraudulent takeovers. It's buried under subsidiary language in Section 9. Ethan stared at her as if she'd just spoken a foreign language. "You expect me to believe a waitress knows more about contract law than my legal department?" She smiled faintly. "Depends on where your legal department learned their ethics." His jaw tightened. "What's your name?" "Sophie Grant." He repeated it like testing the weight of a puzzle piece. "You have 5 seconds to explain how you know that." "I used to work in corporate law," she said simply. "Arcturus Legal, to be specific. Until they made sure I'd never work again." Something flickered behind his eyes, curiosity, maybe respect. "So you're the whistleblower?" Her stomach dropped. "You've heard of me. Everyone in my world has. You cost Arcturus a 7-figure deal when you exposed their compliance violations. They called you unstable. Said you fabricated evidence." "I didn't," she said quietly. "But the truth doesn't matter when power decides the narrative." Ethan studied her for a long moment. Then, without warning, he pulled out his phone and made a call. "Cancel the signing," he said curtly. "Now. And put the contract under independent review." He hung up and turned back to her. "You may have just saved my company." She exhaled, relief washing through her. "You're welcome." "Don't get comfortable," he replied. "You also violated privacy laws and company policy. I could still have you arrested." "Then do it," she said, meeting his glare without flinching. "But at least you'll still have a company to file charges from." He stared at her for a moment, something unreadable in his expression. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, low, sharp, and genuine. "You're either very brave or very stupid, Miss Grant. I haven't decided which yet. Probably both." He tucked his phone into his jacket. "I'll be in touch." And just like that, he walked out, leaving behind a cafe full of stunned silence. Sophie stood rooted to the spot, heart pounding. Around her, whispers began to ripple through the staff, speculation, judgment, awe. She ignored them all. Her hands trembled slightly as she wiped down the counter, the rag moving in slow circles. She'd just crossed a line she could never uncross. That night, she walked home through the rain, her reflection fractured in the puddles of neon light. The city around her buzzed with its usual chaos, but her thoughts were elsewhere, on the man who had looked at her not as a server, but as something infinitely more dangerous, an equal. When she reached her apartment, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. The message was simple. Ethan Ward, we need to talk. Tomorrow. 8 a.m. Ward Tower, 37th floor. Sophie stared at it for a long time, torn between instinct and curiosity. She had promised herself never to step back into that world again, the world of suits and signatures, of lies written in fine print. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The phone lay on her table like an omen, humming softly in the dark. And somewhere, 30 floors above the city, Ethan Ward was reading her file, the one Arcturus Legal had buried. He wasn't angry anymore. He was intrigued. For the first time in years, Sophie felt the spark of something she'd long forgotten, the dangerous pull of purpose. The next morning dawned pale and indifferent, the kind of cold Manhattan day where even the sunlight seemed to wear a suit. Sophie hadn't slept. Her mind replayed every second of the encounter, the sharp tone of Ethan Ward's voice, the disbelief in his eyes, the strange half-smile he gave before leaving. By the time her alarm rang, she already knew she wouldn't be clocking in for her shift at the cafe. She dressed in quiet defiance, choosing a simple gray coat and boots, her reflection in the cracked mirror looking more like her old self than she cared to admit. At precisely 8 o'clock, she stood in the lobby of Ward Tower, dwarfed by marble columns and glass that reached for the sky. The receptionist's smile was polite but wary. "Miss Grant? Mr. Ward is expecting you. 37th floor." The elevator doors whispered open, and for a fleeting moment, Sophie considered leaving. She could step back into anonymity, pretend yesterday had never happened. But then the image of that contract clause flashed in her mind, the legal poison she had seen before, the same tactic that had ruined countless small firms and honest people. No, she told herself. Not this time. The elevator chimed. The 37th floor was a world apart from the cafe below, hushed, minimalist, designed for power. Glass walls divided sleek offices, each humming with controlled chaos. Assistants moved like ghosts carrying files, avoiding eye contact with the woman in the gray coat. When Sophie reached the corner office, she found the door ajar. Ethan Ward was standing by the window, back turned, phone pressed to his ear. "No, I don't want damage control," he was saying, his voice sharp as cut glass. "I want answers. Who inserted that clause? And don't tell me it was a clerical oversight, I've seen enough oversights to last a lifetime." He ended the call and turned. His eyes landed on her, calm but unreadable. "You're punctual. You said 8. I like people who keep their word." He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Sit." Sophie obeyed, her spine straight, hands folded neatly on her lap. She felt exposed under his scrutiny, like a witness under oath. The office was silent except for the faint hum of the city below. "You saved me from signing a catastrophic deal," Ethan began. "You also violated several privacy laws and probably cost me a few sleepless nights wondering who you really are." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the desk. "So, tell me. Why did you do it?" Sophie met his gaze. "Because I couldn't watch another person walk into a trap I've seen before." "You knew about the clause because you worked at Arcturus." "Yes. And they blacklisted you because you exposed their fraud." She nodded once. "They buried evidence of insider trading under the pretense of strategic acquisitions. I filed a report. 2 weeks later, I was out. My credentials disappeared, my references evaporated, and every job offer I had was rescinded." Ethan studied her for a long moment. "You could have walked away yesterday. Why risk your job for a man you don't know?" "Because I know the system you're fighting," she said quietly. "And because people like them count on everyone else being too afraid to act." He leaned back, a flicker of something, respect, maybe admiration, crossing his face. "You're either the most principled woman I've ever met or the best liar." "I don't lie," she replied simply. "It's what cost me everything." For a few seconds, neither spoke. The tension between them was a quiet hum, charged but not hostile. Finally, Ethan sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "My legal team confirmed it this morning. You were right. That contract was a setup. If I'd signed, Arcturus would have owned half my intellectual property portfolio by next quarter. Sophie felt a strange relief wash over her. Then it's over. Not even close, he said. Now I need to know who inside my company let it happen. Her brow furrowed. You think someone on your team was involved? I don't think. I know. His voice dropped. The clause was inserted during an internal review. That means it came from someone with clearance, someone I trust. Sophie hesitated. Then you're already compromised. Ethan gave a humorless laugh. Story of my life. He stood, pacing toward the window again. I'm not naive, Miss Grant. I've made enemies. But this feels coordinated. He turned to face her. I need help. Someone outside the system. Someone who doesn't owe anyone loyalty. Her heart skipped. You want me to investigate your own team? I want you to tell me what you see when you look at them. The patterns, the inconsistencies. The way you spotted Arcturus's play in 5 seconds flat. Sophie hesitated. Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous. Getting involved with another corporate powerhouse was how she'd lost everything in the first place. But something about Ethan's tone, the quiet urgency beneath his control, made it impossible to refuse. I'm not a consultant, she said finally. I serve coffee. He smiled faintly. Not anymore. Consider yourself temporarily promoted. Before she could respond, the intercom buzzed. Mr. Ward, David Mercer from Legal is here. Send him in. The door opened, and a man in his 40s stepped in, tall, polished, with the confidence of someone who'd never been questioned. You wanted to see me? Mercer asked, glancing briefly at Sophie with mild disdain. And you are? A temporary advisor, Ethan replied smoothly. We're reviewing recent acquisitions. Mercer frowned. I wasn't informed of this review. That's because it's internal, Ethan said. Sit down. Mercer hesitated but obeyed, his jaw tightening. Sophie studied him quietly. His watch was a limited edition Montblanc, his cufflinks engraved with subtle initials that didn't match his name. His briefcase, embossed with the logo of a law firm she recognized, Arcturus. Her pulse quickened. Mr. Mercer, she said softly. Do you handle all contract revisions personally? He turned to her, his smile thin. Most of them, yes. Why? I'm curious, she said, maintaining eye contact. How long have you been with Ward Enterprises? 7 years. Long enough to know the internal protocols for jurisdiction transfers. Ethan's brow furrowed. Jurisdiction transfers. Mercer's smile faltered. That's not relevant. It's directly relevant, Sophie said. Clause 9C in the Arcturus contract was an illegal jurisdiction transfer, a trick your old firm perfected. The color drained from Mercer's face. I don't know what you're insinuating, but I don't appreciate. She's not insinuating, Ethan interrupted coldly. She's stating a fact. Mercer stood abruptly. If this is how you conduct internal reviews, I'll inform HR and legal immediately. You'll do no such thing, Ethan said, voice calm but deadly. Sit down. The silence stretched. Mercer glared at Sophie before finally sitting, his movements jerky, defensive. Ethan folded his hands. Until we finish this review, you're relieved of contract authority. Leave your credentials with my assistant. Mercer's jaw clenched. You're making a mistake. Then it won't take long to prove it, Ethan replied evenly. Mercer stormed out, slamming the door. The sound echoed through the office like a gunshot. When the door clicked shut, Ethan exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. You just made me suspend one of my oldest employees. He made himself suspicious, Sophie said. All I did was ask questions. Ethan looked at her with something between disbelief and admiration. You enjoy this, don't you? She smiled faintly. Enjoy isn't the word. But I am good at it. Good enough to keep working with me, he said. Temporarily. Sophie opened her mouth to protest, but he raised a hand. You can say no, but something tells me you won't. Not until you find out why Arcturus came after me, and why they used the same playbook that ruined you. He wasn't wrong. As much as she wanted to walk away, she couldn't. The past had returned, and she needed to know if it was coincidence or something more sinister. "I'll help," she said finally. "But on one condition." "Name it." "I work from outside the building. No official records, no employee ID. I don't exist here." Ethan nodded slowly. "Done." For the next week, Sophie worked quietly from her small apartment, a fortress of laptops, coffee cups, and case files. Using public databases and fragments of old connections, she began mapping the network behind Arcturus's recent activity. Patterns emerged: the same shell companies, the same offshore accounts, the same digital fingerprints she'd once uncovered before being silenced. Every thread led back to a familiar name: Hale and Voss, a private consulting firm rumored to broker corporate espionage. Late one evening, her phone buzzed with a new message. "Ethan Ward, we found something. Mercer's hard drive contains encrypted drafts. Need you at the office tomorrow." Her stomach tightened. She typed back, "Be careful. If Arcturus is still involved, they won't let this go quietly." His reply came instantly, "Neither will I." The next morning, Sophie returned to Ward Tower. Security was tighter than before. She noticed guards stationed near the elevators. Ethan greeted her with a nod, his expression unreadable. "They're on to us," he said quietly. "Mercer cleared his office last night and wiped his access logs." "Which means he's guilty," Sophie said. "But he's not working alone." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then we find who is." As they began sifting through the recovered data, a pattern of hidden correspondence emerged: encrypted messages between Mercer and an external contact labeled only as HV. Sophie stared at the initials, her blood running cold. "Hale and Voss," she whispered. Ethan looked at her sharply. "You're sure?" "I'd bet my life on it. They're the ones Arcturus used to destroy me." For the first time, fear flickered across his face. "Then this isn't just corporate sabotage. It's personal." Sophie met his gaze. "It always is." The office was silent except for the hum of the computers. Outside, the city gleamed like a field of glass, beautiful, fragile, and full of secrets. Somewhere in that labyrinth of wealth and power, a game had begun. And for the first time in years, Sophie Grant wasn't just surviving it. She was ready to fight back. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of long hours, encrypted messages, and unanswered questions. Sophie barely left her apartment except to grab coffee or check for hard copies of files that couldn't risk being stored online. Her world had shrunk into the glow of her laptop screen, a constellation of data points, contracts, and coded correspondences that painted a clearer, darker picture by the hour. Hale and Voss. The name alone was poison. They weren't a law firm so much as a silent weapon. Their specialty wasn't justice, it was control. They engineered hostile takeovers under the guise of strategic mergers, stripping companies of autonomy while keeping their victims too entangled in red tape to fight back. Sophie had seen their work before. She'd testified against one of their shell subsidiaries 5 years earlier, back when she still believed the truth could save her career. Instead, it had destroyed her. Now, they were back. And somehow, they'd set their sights on Ethan Ward. It was late Thursday evening when her phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. The message was brief. "Ethan Ward, I'm sending a car. We're expanding the investigation. Confidential." Sophie frowned. She typed back, "I thought I worked from home." "Ethan, you do. But tonight, I need you in the room." She hesitated. She'd promised herself never to step into another boardroom again, not after what had happened at Arcturus. But something in Ethan's tone, the clipped urgency, the subtle weight behind his words, made her grab her coat anyway. The black sedan that arrived was discreet, tinted, the kind used for executives and diplomats. She slid into the back seat, her reflection fractured in the window glass as the city lights streaked by. Manhattan was alive in its winter shimmer, indifferent to the silent wars waged in its skyscrapers. When the car stopped, they weren't at Ward Tower. Instead, they pulled into a gated estate on the Upper East Side. Ethan was waiting at the door, dressed not in his usual tailored suit but in a dark sweater and slacks. The casualness felt almost strange on him. "You came," he said simply. You didn't really give me a choice. He smiled faintly. True. Come in. The interior of the townhouse was minimalist but warm, clean lines, pale oak, soft lighting. A fire crackled in a marble hearth. Papers were spread across a long table, financial charts, communication logs, printed emails. Sophie recognized Mercer's name in several headers. Another name appeared frequently too, V. Hale. Ethan gestured to the table. This is everything we've recovered. You were right about Hale and Voss. Mercer's communications lead directly to them. Sophie scanned the documents, her pulse quickening. These timestamps, they overlap with the Arcturus contract revision period. He wasn't just passing information, he was coordinating the sabotage. Ethan nodded. They wanted me to sign that deal, knowing it would trigger a collapse. My company's intellectual property would have been transferred to an overseas proxy owned by Hale and Voss. And once the stock plummeted, they'd buy it back at pennies, Sophie finished. Classic predatory acquisition. He studied her face for a moment. You sound like you've lived this before. I have, she said quietly. Only last time, I was on the inside. Ethan leaned back against the table, arms crossed. Then you understand why I can't go to my legal team. The moment I do, Hale and Voss will know. Mercer's not the only one they have in their pocket. Sophie looked at him. Then what's your plan? He hesitated, then picked up a folder and slid it toward her. Inside were copies of confidential internal reports, stamped with Ward Enterprises insignia. I'm assembling a shadow audit team, a few trusted people outside corporate oversight. Analysts, security, finance. I want you to lead the legal arm of it. Her breath caught. You want me to what? I need someone who knows how these people think, Ethan said. Someone who isn't afraid to look where others won't. I told you before, I'm not a consultant anymore. Maybe not officially, he said, eyes locked on hers. But you're the best one I've ever seen. She shook her head, fighting the old instinct to run. Ethan, I can't step back into that world. Not again. The moment Hale and Voss find out I'm involved. They already know, he interrupted softly. Her heart sank. What? I had someone trace the digital breach from Mercer's laptop. There was an access ping 3 hours after you left yesterday, from an encrypted IP tied to Hale and Voss. They know your name. They know you're working with me. Sophie exhaled shakily. Then it's only a matter of time before they move. Ethan nodded. Which is why we move first. He poured 2 glasses of water, setting one before her. If you help me expose them, I can clear your name, Sophie. Every record, every false report they ever filed, gone. I can make it right. She looked at him, torn. For years, she'd dreamed of redemption, of reclaiming her name, her career, her dignity. But at what cost? Getting involved again could mean losing everything she'd rebuilt, fragile as it was. Why are you doing this? She asked finally. You could hire anyone. People with clean records, influence, power. Because they'd play it safe, Ethan said. And you don't. The silence that followed was heavy but electric. Sophie stared into the flicker of the fireplace, her mind churning. Somewhere deep down, the same fire that once drove her to expose Arcturus was stirring again. Maybe this was her second chance. Or maybe it was the same trap wearing a different face. All right, she said finally. I'll help. But I want full autonomy. No filters, no interference. And if I say stop, we stop. Ethan's expression softened. Agreed. He extended a hand. Partners? She hesitated before shaking it. His grip was warm, steady, the handshake of someone who meant what he said. That night marked the beginning of their partnership, and the end of Sophie's anonymity. Over the next week, the townhouse became their war room. Sophie mapped out the legal architecture of the conspiracy, how Mercer funneled internal documents through encrypted intermediaries, how offshore shell companies disguised the money flow, and how every path led back to a private investment fund quietly controlled by Victor Hale, the same man who had once overseen her dismissal at Arcturus. Every revelation tightened the knot in her chest. It wasn't coincidence. It was revenge. Ethan worked beside her, running corporate intelligence sweeps and leveraging contacts in finance. Their dynamic evolved, cautious respect giving way to quiet trust. They fell into rhythm. She'd decode legal jargon while he cross-referenced digital footprints, their conversations clipped but charged with unspoken energy. Late one night, Ethan looked up from his laptop. "You haven't slept. Neither have you." He smiled faintly. "Fair point." She leaned back, rubbing her temples. "You ever wonder why people like Hale do this? Why they destroy others just to win?" Ethan's eyes darkened. "Because they mistake fear for power. They think control means survival. But the truth is, it's just desperation in a nicer suit." She studied him for a moment, the weight in his tone hinting at his own scars. "You sound like you've been there." He looked out the window, the city lights reflected in his eyes. "Once. I learned the hard way that trust is the most expensive currency in business." Sophie nodded. "And the rarest." A beat of silence stretched between them. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like an exile. She felt seen. 2 days later, they got their first major break. A recovered metadata log from Mercer's personal drive showed scheduled file transfers to an offshore repository labeled Project Winterline. Sophie cross-checked the signature hash. It matched a confidential internal report she had authored years ago for Arcturus. The realization hit like ice. "They're recycling my old work," she said, voice shaking. "They're using my own legal frameworks to launder intellectual property." Ethan stared at her, jaw tightening. "Then we use that against them. If those documents are yours, we can prove the entire operation is theft under U.S. corporate law." Her pulse quickened. "You'd have to make it public." He met her gaze steadily. "Then we make it public." But before they could act, the first warning arrived. When Sophie returned to her apartment that night, her door was slightly ajar. Inside, nothing was stolen, but her files were gone. Every printed document, every flash drive, every trace of her investigation had vanished. On her table lay a single folded note. "Stay silent, or history repeats itself." Her hands trembled as she read it. The paper smelled faintly of cologne, expensive, familiar. Victor Hale. She didn't call the police. Instead, she called Ethan. He answered on the first ring. "What happened?" "They've been here," she said, voice low. "Hale's people. They took everything." There was a pause, then his tone hardened. "Pack a bag. I'm sending security. You're staying here until this is over." "Ethan, I can't." "You can, and you will." By the time she arrived at the townhouse again, her nerves were frayed. Ethan was waiting with 2 security officers stationed outside. "They won't touch you again," he said quietly. "Not while you're under my protection." Sophie sank into the nearest chair, her composure cracking for the first time. "You don't get it," she whispered. "This isn't about contracts anymore. Hale wants to finish what he started. He wants me discredited again, or gone." Ethan crouched in front of her, voice firm but gentle. "Then we don't hide. We fight smarter." She met his gaze. "You're risking everything for this." "So are you," he said. "But maybe that's the only way to win." The fire burned low behind him, shadows flickering against the walls. Sophie realized then that they were past the point of return. The war wasn't corporate anymore. It was personal, intimate, and far too dangerous to stop. That night, as she looked over the city from the townhouse window, Sophie made a silent vow: if Victor Hale wanted her silenced, he'd have to face her first. She was done running. And Ethan Ward, the man she'd once thought was just another millionaire with too much ego, had become her only ally in a world built on betrayal. By morning, the city was wrapped in mist, the kind that blurred lines and softened edges. Sophie watched from the townhouse window as the streets below pulsed with early traffic, unaware of the storm brewing 37 floors above. She had slept barely 2 hours. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that note again: "Stay silent, or history repeats itself." Victor Hale's handwriting was unmistakable. Elegant. Precise. Cruel. Ethan entered the room carrying 2 cups of coffee. He set one beside her, his voice calm but firm. Security has a trace on the prints from your apartment. They're running matches now. Sophie didn't look away from the window. It won't matter. He's too smart to leave a real trail. Maybe, Ethan said, but arrogance makes people sloppy. He leaned against the wall, studying her profile. You knew him well, didn't you? Her shoulders stiffened. You could say that. He waited for her to elaborate, but she didn't. Silence filled the space between them until he finally said, You need to tell me what happened, Sophie. The full story. No more half-truths. She turned then, her expression unreadable. You want the truth? Fine. She set her cup down and crossed her arms. But you might not like what you hear. Ethan gestured to the couch. Try me. Sophie sat, her hands clasped tightly together. The light through the window caught the faint tremor in her fingers. 5 years ago, I wasn't a waitress. I was an associate attorney at Arcturus Legal. Bright, ambitious, naive enough to think integrity still meant something in corporate law. Victor Hale was my mentor, or so I thought. Her voice softened, fretted with bitterness. He recruited me right out of Columbia. Said I had moral backbone, that I was exactly what the firm needed. I believed him. For a while, it even felt true. Until I discovered what we were really doing. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Arcturus didn't just manage mergers, they orchestrated them. They'd identify companies with valuable assets, then insert exploitative clauses into deals. The victims didn't realize they were signing away their futures until it was too late. It was legal theft, hidden behind corporate jargon. I stumbled on one of those cases while reviewing client files, a tech startup being gutted from the inside. I confronted Hale. She took a deep breath. He told me to adjust my conscience to the market. When I refused, he smiled and said he admired my idealism. 2 weeks later, I was accused of fabricating evidence. The files I had collected disappeared overnight. My badge was revoked. My name was dragged through every industry channel until no firm would touch me. Ethan's jaw tightened. And he got away with it. Of course he did, Sophie said. He always does. Hale doesn't destroy people immediately, he erodes them. Makes them doubt themselves first. By the time you realize what's happening, you've already lost. The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the heater. Ethan sat across from her, absorbing every word. Why didn't you go public? I tried, she said quietly. I went to the Bar Association, the SEC, even a journalist I trusted. But every door closed. Arcturus owned half the media outlets through shell subsidiaries. They painted me as unstable, vindictive, a woman scorned by her mentor. Within a month, I couldn't even get a job at a paralegal's office. Her voice cracked then, but she steadied it quickly. So, I stopped fighting. I became invisible. I thought if I stayed small enough, quiet enough, the world would forget me. But Hale didn't. He made sure I remembered what silence costs. Ethan leaned forward, his tone low but fierce. That ends now. Sophie looked up sharply. You can't fight him, Ethan. He's too connected. You'll lose everything. He smiled faintly. Then I'll lose on my own terms. She stared at him, frustration and admiration warring in her chest. You sound like me 5 years ago. Maybe, he said. Or maybe you just forgot what it feels like to believe in something again. For a long moment, neither spoke. The world outside continued indifferent, unaware that two people inside a glass tower were about to challenge the machinery of corruption itself. By afternoon, they had returned to Ward Tower. The investigation had expanded, Ethan's inner circle was shrinking fast. Mercer's suspension had sent ripples through the staff. People avoided eye contact in the halls. Whispers followed Sophie everywhere she went. When they entered the executive floor, Ethan's assistant, Clara, intercepted them. Mr. Ward, Mr. Hale is here to see you. Sophie froze. Hale. Ethan frowned. Victor Hale. Clara nodded. He says it's urgent. He's waiting in the conference room. Sophie's pulse spiked. You can't see him alone. I wasn't planning to, Ethan said. They walked together down the hallway. The conference room loomed ahead, glass walls framing a panoramic view of the city. Inside, Victor Hale stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. Time hadn't touched him much, still immaculate, still radiating quiet control. He turned as they entered, his smile polite and venomous. "Ethan," he said smoothly. "It's been too long." Then his gaze shifted to Sophie. "And Miss Grant. What an unexpected reunion." Sophie's throat went dry. "You broke into my home." He chuckled softly. "Please. Let's not dramatize. I was simply ensuring certain documents didn't fall into the wrong hands." Ethan stepped forward, his tone ice. "You mean my hands?" Hale's expression didn't change. "Your outrage is understandable, but misplaced. The Arcturus deal was a legitimate offer. If you've chosen to poison it with paranoia, that's your prerogative." Sophie crossed her arms. "We both know that clause was fraudulent." "Do we?" he asked mildly. "Because last time you made such accusations, it didn't end well for you, did it?" Her jaw clenched. "You ruined my life." "I refined your perspective," he corrected. "You were too idealistic. I did you a favor." Ethan's voice hardened. "You manipulated my employee to betray me. You planted an illegal clause to strip my company's assets. And you had the nerve to show up here." Hale's smile thinned. "Careful, Ethan. Allegations like that could destroy reputations, even yours." Ethan's reply was quiet but lethal. "So could evidence." The silence that followed was electric. For the first time, Hale's confidence faltered. "You have no proof." "Not yet," Sophie said, stepping forward. "But we will." Hale regarded her with something like amusement. "Still the crusader. You never learn, do you? Some wars can't be won with truth. They're won with leverage." He turned to Ethan. "You'd be wise to remember that." He straightened his jacket and moved toward the door. "Enjoy your rebellion, children. It'll be short-lived." Then he was gone. The moment the door closed, Ethan exhaled, fury simmering beneath his calm exterior. "He's rattled." Sophie shook her head. "No. He's buying time. He'll come back harder. Then we hit first." She looked at him, uncertain. "How?" "By turning his own weapon against him," Ethan said. "We leaked the Arcturus clause publicly, not through corporate channels, but through the same media pipeline he controls. Anonymous source, undisclosed data leak. He can't bury something that spreads faster than his influence." Sophie hesitated. "That's risky. He'll trace it back to us." "Not if we move fast enough." That night, the plan went into motion. Sophie compiled the files, scanned copies, metadata logs, and a timeline proving the fraud. Ethan reached out to an independent journalist he trusted, someone outside Hale's network. They sent everything through an encrypted Dropbox, the final file labeled simply, "The Winterline Papers." Hours later, the first article went live. Exposé reveals illegal contract manipulation at Arcturus Legal, sources claim billion-dollar fraud. The story exploded across every platform by morning. News anchors called it the biggest corporate scandal of the decade. Arcturus's stock plummeted. Hale's name trended worldwide, though not in the way he liked. For a brief moment, Sophie allowed herself to breathe. Then the counterattack came. By noon, Ethan's investors were panicking. Anonymous emails circulated claiming he had leaked the documents himself to sabotage a rival. Journalists began calling his office for comment. By afternoon, a new story emerged, disgraced ex-lawyer Sophie Grant accused of fabricating evidence once again. Sophie felt the blood drain from her face. "He's framing us." Ethan slammed his fist on the desk. He had this ready. He knew we'd go public. "Of course he did," she said bitterly. "He's been 10 steps ahead since the beginning." Ethan paced, his composure cracking for the first time. "If he discredits us before the investigation hits court, everything collapses." Sophie closed her eyes, forcing her thoughts to steady. "Then we need undeniable proof, something even he can't spin." "What kind of proof?" "The original correspondence," she said slowly. "Emails, drafts, timestamps, something that shows Mercer and Hale coordinating the fraud. Ethan frowned. Mercer wiped his drives. But not his backups, she said. If Hale's pattern holds, he would have required Mercer to send encrypted duplicates to his personal archive for security. If we find that archive, we find the smoking gun. Ethan stared at her, realization dawning. And you know where he keeps them? She nodded. Arcturus headquarters. Sublevel storage. Access restricted to partners. Ethan gave a short laugh. You still have clearance? Sophie smiled grimly. I never gave it back. He shook his head, half in disbelief. You planned for this? I survived them, she said simply. You don't survive without backup plans. Ethan looked at her for a long time, admiration and something deeper flickering in his gaze. Then we go get it. Sophie hesitated. That would mean breaking into Arcturus. He shrugged. After today, we're already criminals in their eyes. For the first time in days, she laughed, low, genuine, almost disbelieving. You're insane. Probably, he said. But so are you for staying. She met his eyes, the fire between them undeniable now. Then let's be insane together. Outside, the city roared beneath them, a world of glass and deception, unaware that two people inside one of its towers had just declared war on its masters. The die was cast. There would be no going back. For Sophie Grant, this wasn't just a fight for justice anymore. It was the reckoning she'd been waiting for since the day Victor Hale took her life apart. And this time, she wasn't alone. The air outside Arcturus Legal felt heavier than usual, as if the very building resented what Sophie was about to do. The glass facade reflected the city lights like 1,000 silent witnesses, each one watching, each one complicit. She stood across the street beside Ethan, her breath clouding in the cold night air. The hum of traffic blended with the low whine of distant sirens. It was close to midnight, the hour when New York traded noise for secrets. This is insane, Ethan muttered, his tone halfway between awe and disbelief. You realize what happens if we get caught? Sophie adjusted her scarf, eyes fixed on the glowing Arcturus logo above the entrance. We won't get caught. You sound awfully confident for someone about to break into a law firm. She shot him a faint smirk. I used to work there. Trust me, they're more concerned about external threats than ghosts from their past. Ghosts? He asked, glancing at her. She exhaled slowly. That's what I became after they destroyed me. Tonight, I stop haunting myself. They crossed the street together, their footsteps soundless against the pavement. The security guard inside barely looked up when Sophie swiped her old access card. The scanner blinked green. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You kept your clearance active. I had a friend in IT, she said. He owed me. They slipped through the revolving doors, the lobby echoing faintly with the sterile hum of fluorescent lights. The walls were the same, silver-gray panels, modern art chosen to impress but not inspire. Sophie's pulse quickened as they approached the elevator. Every beep of the scanner, every mechanical whir, sent adrenaline flooding through her veins. Sublevel 3. Records and Archives. The elevator doors opened into a long, cold corridor lined with metal doors. A motion-activated light flickered on, revealing the security camera at the far end. Sophie turned to Ethan. I'll handle it. From her bag, she pulled a small device, a wireless jammer. A gift from a friend who used to work in cybersecurity. We've got about 6 minutes before it resets. Ethan chuckled under his breath. Remind me never to underestimate you again. Noted, she said, moving toward the archive room. The electronic lock blinked red. She entered a string of numbers, her old employee code, followed by a manual override key sequence she had memorized years ago. The door clicked open with a soft hiss. Inside, the air was stale, smelling faintly of paper and dust. Rows of filing cabinets stretched into the darkness, each drawer labeled with cryptic case codes. Sophie moved with the precision of someone returning to a battlefield she knew too well. Here, she whispered, stopping before a cabinet marked 2018 to 2020, executive contracts. Mercer's correspondence should be filed under his partner ID, MRC 47. Ethan opened drawers while she scanned the digital terminal beside them, fingers flying across the keyboard. The holographic interface flickered to life, listing file entries. "Come on," she muttered. "Where is it?" Finally, she found it, a directory labeled Winterline_archive with multiple subfolders. "Found it." Ethan peered over her shoulder. "Can you access it?" She smiled grimly. "I built half their encryption systems." "Of course I can." It took less than a minute. The folder opened, revealing thousands of files, emails, scanned contracts, voice recordings. But one document stood out, Winterline_primary_agreement_final.docs. Sophie opened it, and the contents hit her like a punch to the chest. "This isn't just about Ward Enterprises," she said, voice trembling. "They've done this to over a dozen companies. All using my frameworks." Ethan's expression hardened. "Then this isn't a case anymore. It's a conspiracy." She downloaded the data onto a secure flash drive, encrypting it twice. Just as she finished, the lights above them flickered. Ethan froze. "That normal?" "No," she said, straightening. "The jammer reset early." A voice echoed from the corridor. "Miss Grant." "Mr. Ward. I had a feeling you'd come here." Victor Hale's voice was unmistakable, smooth, calm, predatory. Ethan stepped in front of Sophie, his stance protective. "How did you know?" Hale emerged from the shadows, flanked by two men in dark suits. "You're predictable. Idealists always are. You leak files, I discredit you. You seek proof, I provide bait. You think you're exposing corruption, but you're only deepening your own graves." Sophie clenched her fists. "You framed me once. I won't let you do it again." He smiled. "You think this little drive matters? By tomorrow morning, the narrative will be complete. Disgraced former lawyer breaks into law firm with billionaire accomplice, theft of confidential data. It writes itself." Ethan's voice dropped, cold as steel. "Except this time, you're in the footage too." Hale's smile faltered. "What?" Ethan lifted his wrist, showing his smartwatch. A red indicator blinked faintly. "Live backup recording. Facial recognition, time-stamped entry, audio verification. The moment you walked in, you tied yourself to the crime scene." For the first time, Hale's composure cracked. "You bluff well, Mr. Ward. Perhaps you should have been a lawyer." "I have one standing next to me," Ethan said. The tension thickened. One of Hale's guards stepped forward, but Sophie raised a hand. "Don't," she warned. "I already sent a copy of the files to an off-site server. If anything happens to us, they'll go public in seconds." Hale's eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't." "Try me," she said. For several long seconds, no one moved. Then Hale exhaled slowly, the predator's patience giving way to grudging respect. "You've learned something since our last encounter." Sophie met his gaze steadily. "I learned that truth doesn't die just because you bury it." He smiled faintly, though the edge in his voice remained. "Perhaps. But every truth has a price." He gestured to his men. "We're leaving. Enjoy your temporary victory." When they were gone, Ethan turned to Sophie, adrenaline still pulsing through his veins. "You really sent that backup?" She gave him a faint grin. "No. But he doesn't know that." He laughed softly. "Remind me never to play poker with you." They left Arcturus before dawn, the flash drive hidden beneath Sophie's coat. Back at the townhouse, they examined the data, thousands of documents exposing the extent of Hale's corruption. There were emails between Mercer and Hale, financial transfers to offshore accounts, even directives to manipulate evidence against Sophie 5 years ago. It was everything they needed. Ethan leaned back, exhaustion etched across his face. "This is it. This is what takes him down." Sophie nodded, though her eyes remained on the screen. "It's not enough to leak it. Hale's already controlling the narrative. We need an official investigation, something public, undeniable." "You mean court?" "Yes. Federal level. SEC, Department of Justice, someone who can't be bought." Ethan frowned. "That'll take weeks. Hale will strike long before that." "Then we give him a distraction," Sophie said. "Something big enough to make him feel safe again." We let him think we've stopped fighting. He studied her face. You're frighteningly good at this. She smiled faintly. You learn fast when survival's on the line. For the next 48 hours, they executed their counter-strategy. Ethan publicly issued a statement denying any wrongdoing and withdrawing all pending legal complaints. The media painted it as an admission of defeat. Stock analysts called him reckless. Investors threatened to withdraw. Sophie stayed hidden, monitoring digital chatter from Hale's network. Predictably, he took the bait. 2 days later, Hale scheduled a press conference to announce that Ward Enterprises would be merging under new leadership, his own. It was the final step in his takeover plan. Sophie and Ethan sat side by side in the townhouse as the livestream began. Hale stood behind a podium, cameras flashing. In light of recent misunderstandings, he said smoothly, Ward Enterprises will undergo restructuring to ensure transparency and stability. Mr. Ward has agreed to step down pending review. Ethan's jaw tightened. That's enough. Sophie nodded. Time to end this. She pressed a single key on her laptop. Instantly, the live stream glitched, and then resumed, this time with split-screen footage. On the left, Hale at the podium. On the right, the contents of the flash drive. Emails, bank statements, voice recordings. Proof of corporate espionage, fraud, and witness intimidation. The room around Hale erupted into chaos. Reporters shouted questions, security scrambled, and his calm veneer shattered on live television. Ethan smiled grimly. You really did send the backup this time. Sophie exhaled. This time, yes. By evening, federal investigators had raided Arcturus headquarters. Hale was nowhere to be found. The media called it the corporate exposé of the century. Sophie's name appeared not as a disgraced lawyer, but as a whistleblower who had brought one of the most powerful men in finance to his knees. But victory, she knew, was never simple. That night, as she and Ethan sat in the quiet after the storm, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, frowning. Unknown number. He answered. Hello. A pause. Then a voice, cold, familiar, unbroken. You think you've won, Ethan? This isn't over. The line went dead. Sophie looked up from the couch. Hale. Ethan nodded slowly. He's not done. She stared into the fire, her mind already calculating. Then neither are we. Outside, snow began to fall over the city, blanketing the chaos in deceptive peace. Somewhere out there, Victor Hale was already rebuilding, but so was Sophie. And this time, she wasn't fighting for redemption. She was fighting for justice. And she intended to finish it. Morning came in a wash of gray light over the skyline. News helicopters buzzed above the Ward Tower, their cameras circling like vultures waiting for the next drop of blood. The Winterline scandal, as it was now called, dominated every channel. Stock tickers crawled across screens, executives were resigning, and federal agencies had launched official investigations. Ethan Ward's name was everywhere, some hailed him a hero, others called him reckless. And Sophie Grant, once the ghost of a ruined reputation, was the story's quiet storm, the whistleblower who came back from the dead. But beneath the headlines, something darker stirred. Ethan stood by the window of his office, coffee untouched, eyes fixed on the city below. They still haven't found him, he said finally. Sophie looked up from the laptop on his desk, scrolling through a series of encrypted reports. Hale doesn't run. He relocates. He's probably 3 steps ahead already, trying to rebuild his narrative. Ethan turned. Can he? Not legally, she replied. But Hale's empire was never about legality. It's about perception. He'll use fear, connections, misinformation, anything to make us look unstable. As if on cue, Ethan's assistant burst through the door. Sir, you need to see this. She set a tablet on the desk. A video played, an emergency press statement from Victor Hale. He looked perfectly composed, seated behind a polished mahogany desk, the backdrop a library lined with law books and framed accolades. Recent allegations against me and Arcturus Legal are entirely false, Hale said smoothly. Fabricated by a disgraced former employee, Miss Sophie Grant, and a CEO under investigation for financial misconduct, Mr. Ethan Ward. Both are attempting to deflect from their own criminal liabilities. As of this morning, I have filed defamation and data theft charges against them. Sophie's face drained of color. He's weaponizing the system. Ethan clenched his fists. And the media will eat it up. Not if we move first, she said. We still have the original files, authenticated, time-stamped, legally traceable. Ethan nodded. Then we take this to court. Sophie hesitated. He'll have the best defense money can buy. He'll drag it out for years. He wants us to break first. Then we give him something he can't drag out, Ethan said, his voice darkening. We go public again, but this time, we don't just expose his contracts. We expose him. That night, the townhouse turned into their command center again. The walls were covered with printouts, digital evidence, and news clippings. Sophie traced red lines across a corkboard, connecting the names of shell companies, judges, and offshore accounts. He owns influence everywhere, she said. 3 senators, 2 media moguls, and at least 1 federal prosecutor. We can't trust traditional channels. Ethan leaned over the table. So we go unconventional. She met his eyes. Meaning? He hesitated. I know a man at the Financial Crimes Bureau. He owes me a favor. If we hand him the evidence directly, bypassing the chain of command, we might trigger an internal review before Hale can intervene. Sophie frowned. You trust him? I trust his greed. He's been waiting to make a name for himself. Taking down Victor Hale would do that. Sophie studied him for a moment, then nodded. It's risky, but it's our best shot. The following evening, they met in an underground parking garage beneath the financial district. The air was damp, the smell of oil and concrete thick around them. A black SUV rolled in, headlights cutting through the darkness. A man stepped out, mid-50s, sharp suit, the kind of confidence that came from knowing too many secrets. Mr. Ward, he said, shaking Ethan's hand. And this must be the famous Sophie Grant. I've heard quite the story. Sophie didn't smile. Let's hope you hear the truth this time. He chuckled. I like you already. Ethan handed him a sealed envelope. Everything you need. Financial trails, communications, witness statements. The man whistled softly as he weighed the folder. This could burn half of Wall Street. That's the idea, Ethan said. But before the man could open the envelope, a distant screech echoed through the garage, tires on concrete. Headlights flared from the far ramp, blinding them. Sophie's instincts kicked in. Get down, she shouted. Gunfire erupted, shattering the silence. Bullets ricocheted off metal pillars, sparks scattering across the floor. The agent dove behind his SUV as Ethan pulled Sophie to cover behind a concrete barrier. Who the hell, Ethan started. Hale, Sophie said through gritted teeth. He's cutting off the evidence at the source. The gunfire paused just long enough for a voice to echo through the garage. You never learn, Sophie. It was Hale. He stepped into view, flanked by 2 armed men. His suit was immaculate, his smile unchanged. I offered you a chance to walk away. But you just couldn't resist playing hero again, could you? Sophie stood slowly, using the pillar for cover. Heroes don't frame people for crimes they didn't commit. Hale tilted his head. And yet, you're standing in a parking lot exchanging stolen documents with a federal agent. Tell me, who looks guilty now? The agent, pinned down behind his vehicle, shouted, Ward, what is this? Ethan's jaw tightened. A setup. Hale sighed theatrically. It's such a shame, really. You both could have had everything. Instead, you'll be remembered as criminals. Sophie glanced at Ethan, whispering, he wants us alive long enough for the police to find us with the evidence. Ethan nodded grimly. Then we don't give him that chance. He reached into his pocket, pressing a small button on his smartwatch. A faint beep sounded. Hale frowned. What did you just do? Triggered an emergency transmission, Ethan said. Every security camera in this garage is now streaming live to 3 different servers, and one of them belongs to your friends at the DOJ. Hale's eyes flashed with anger. You think I'm afraid of exposure? Sophie stepped forward. You should be. Because this time, you're not the one controlling the narrative. Hale's men hesitated, uncertain. The power shifted subtly, and Hale felt it. His composure cracked just enough for Ethan to notice. "You're cornered, Victor," Ethan said. "You can't shoot your way out of this one." Hale smiled coldly. "Maybe not. But I can make you regret crossing me." He snapped his fingers. One of his men threw a small black device, a flash charge. The explosion of light and sound was blinding. When the haze cleared, Hale was gone. Only the echo of his voice lingered. "See you in court, Mr. Ward." By the time the police arrived, the parking garage was chaos. Officers questioned Ethan, Sophie, and the shaken federal agent, who corroborated their story. The live feed Ethan had triggered captured everything, including Hale's face, his threats, and his escape. The next 48 hours were a blur of subpoenas, security reviews, and public outrage. The Department of Justice officially opened a criminal investigation against Victor Hale for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted witness intimidation. For the first time in years, he was truly cornered. But Hale wasn't done. A week later, Ethan received a formal summons. Hale had filed a civil countersuit for defamation and unlawful surveillance, demanding billions in damages. It was a legal trap, a public spectacle meant to discredit them before the criminal case could proceed. Sophie met Ethan in his office, tossing the thick stack of papers on his desk. "He's baiting us again." Ethan nodded. "Then we bait him back." The courtroom was packed on the day of the hearing. Cameras lined the aisles, reporters whispered into microphones, and the air buzzed with anticipation. At the plaintiff's table sat Victor Hale, perfectly composed, his lawyers arrayed like soldiers. Across from him sat Sophie and Ethan, side by side, their calm masking the storm beneath. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. Hale's attorney began with theatrical indignation. "Your Honor, my client has been subjected to baseless accusations and unlawful surveillance by these defendants, resulting in severe reputational damage and financial loss." The judge nodded. "And your evidence?" The lawyer gestured to a monitor. "Video recordings provided by the defendants themselves, illegally obtained, inadmissible, and edited to misrepresent context." The footage played, selectively cut clips from the parking garage encounter, clearly manipulated. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Ethan leaned toward Sophie. "He's faster than we thought." Sophie whispered, "Wait for it." When the lawyer finished, Sophie stood. "Your Honor, may I?" The judge nodded. "Proceed." Sophie approached the bench, calm and deliberate. "The plaintiff accuses us of manipulation, yet he conveniently omits the existence of the original recordings, unedited, time-stamped, and verified by federal servers." She turned to the screen. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to submit Exhibit B." The second video began. This time, it showed everything: Hale's threats, the gunfire, the flash charge, his confession. The courtroom gasped again, louder this time. Even the judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Hale's composure shattered. "That's impossible. Those files were encrypted." Ethan smiled faintly. "Not encrypted enough." The judge slammed the gavel. "Mr. Hale, you are advised to remain silent. This case is now under criminal review." Hale's lawyers erupted in protest, but it was too late. Federal agents waiting in the back row stepped forward, badges gleaming. The lead agent spoke firmly, "Victor Hale, you are under arrest for fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit corporate espionage." As Hale was handcuffed, he turned to Sophie, eyes burning. "You think you've won?" She met his gaze evenly. "No. Justice did." The crowd erupted as cameras flashed, capturing the moment that would headline every paper by morning: "Corporate Titan Falls, Whistleblower's Evidence Ends Empire." After the hearing, Sophie and Ethan stood outside the courthouse as the media swarmed around them. Reporters shouted questions, microphones thrust forward, but for once, Sophie didn't flinch. She stood tall, the winter wind whipping through her hair, her past finally unshackled. A reporter called out, "Miss Grant. How does it feel to be vindicated?" Sophie paused, then smiled faintly. "It feels like breathing again." Ethan placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Let's go home." They slipped away through the crowd, disappearing into the waiting car. The city lights blurred past as they drove in silence, the adrenaline slowly ebbing. For the first time in years, Sophie felt at peace. But as they reached the townhouse, Ethan's phone buzzed with a single message from an unknown number. He wasn't the only one. Sophie looked at him, a chill running down her spine. What does it mean? Ethan exhaled, staring at the message. It means Hale wasn't working alone. She sank into the couch, her mind already spinning. Then this isn't over. He nodded slowly. No. But it's our turn to choose how it ends. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the firelight casting soft shadows around them. The world outside still buzzed with chaos, but inside, there was something steadier, the beginning of trust, and maybe, something more. Sophie closed her eyes, feeling the weight of everything lift, just for a heartbeat. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid. Because she finally understood, some wars weren't fought for victory. They were fought for truth. And truth, once set free, never stayed silent for long. The days that followed Hale's arrest were an uneasy calm, the kind that came after a long, deafening storm. Reporters camped outside Ward Tower and the townhouse, waiting for a new headline. Networks debated endlessly about Sophie Grant's redemption arc, while corporate watchdogs hailed Ethan Ward as the man who brought a legal giant to its knees. The world had chosen its heroes. But Sophie didn't feel like one. She sat by the window of the townhouse, watching snowflakes drift lazily against the glass. Her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold. The silence was comforting, but beneath it lurked the tremor of unfinished business. Hale's final message echoed in her mind, he wasn't the only one. Ethan entered quietly, a file in hand. The Justice Department just confirmed it, he said. Hale's assets are frozen. Arcturus is finished. Sophie nodded absently. Then why doesn't it feel over? He hesitated. Because it isn't. He set the file on the table. They traced Hale's offshore accounts. There's another name attached, a silent partner. A holding company called Rexon International. She frowned. Never heard of it. You wouldn't have. It's registered out of Zurich, but its funding ties back here, to a trust connected to Ward Enterprises. Her head snapped up. What? Ethan nodded grimly. Someone inside my board helped Hale. They wanted the merger to happen. They were betting against me, planning to seize control once Hale destroyed the company. Sophie leaned back, processing. Then Hale was never the endgame. He was the weapon. Exactly, Ethan said. And now that he's gone, whoever's behind this will make their next move. 3 days later, that move came. A leaked report hit the financial networks, Ward Enterprises under investigation for insider trading. The accusation was fabricated, but the impact was instant. Stocks plunged, investors fled, and the same talking heads who'd praised Ethan last week now tore him apart. Sophie watched it unfold, her anger simmering. They're dismantling you the same way they did me. Ethan gave a hollow laugh. Guess I'm in good company, then. She stood. No. We're not letting this happen again. Not to you, not to anyone. Then where do we start? With Rexon, she said. If we find who's behind that company, we end this. The search took them deep into the labyrinth of corporate secrecy, encrypted bank trails, proxy directors, dummy subsidiaries. Sophie's skills as a legal investigator returned with sharp precision, honed by years of survival. She worked late into the night, cross-referencing ownership documents, building digital bridges between accounts. By the third night, she found it, a hidden connection buried beneath layers of shell corporations. A trust fund managed by Thomas Vance, the Ward Enterprises chief financial officer. Sophie's stomach twisted. Your own CFO. Ethan's expression darkened. He's been with me 10 years. Which makes him perfect, she said. He had access to everything, the financials, the contracts, even your personal communications. Ethan stared at the screen, jaw tight. He played me. Sophie closed the laptop. Then we make him regret it. The confrontation came the next morning in the executive boardroom of Ward Tower. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Vance sat at the far end of the table, his usual charm replaced by cautious detachment. "You wanted to see me, Ethan?" Ethan stood at the head of the table, arms crossed. "You've been busy." Vance smiled thinly. "If this is about the stock situation, I assure you." "Cut the act," Ethan snapped. "Rexon International. It's your trust. You partnered with Hale." For a split second, the mask slipped, a flicker of recognition in Vance's eyes, then the smirk returned. "You can't prove that." Sophie slid a folder across the table. "Actually, we can. Bank transfers, encrypted emails, jurisdictional filings, all traced back to your name." Vance's smirk faltered. "You think anyone will believe her again?" Sophie met his gaze coldly. "They don't need to. The Department of Justice will." Vance leaned back, unruffled. "You're both naive. You think taking down Hale mattered? He was a pawn. There are 10 more like him waiting for the vacuum he left behind. This world doesn't change because you exposed one man, it adapts. And it always wins." Ethan's voice was quiet but cutting. "Not this time." He hit a key on the conference console. The speakers crackled to life, live audio streaming through a secure line. "This is Special Agent Torres with the Financial Crimes Bureau," came a voice. "We've heard enough." Vance's eyes widened. "You bugged the room?" Ethan's tone was calm. "No. You bugged my office 3 months ago. I just rerouted your own system." Within minutes, federal agents entered, their badges flashing. Vance didn't fight. He simply smiled as they cuffed him. "You think this is justice? It's a ripple in an ocean, Ethan. The tide's still coming." As they led him away, Sophie felt a cold dread settle in her chest. Vance's words weren't a threat. They were a promise. That evening, she and Ethan stood on the balcony overlooking the city. The sun was setting, staining the skyline in shades of orange and crimson. For the first time, she noticed how tired he looked, the weight of leadership, betrayal, and endless vigilance etched into his features. "It's over," she said softly. He shook his head. "No. It never really is. There's always another Vance, another Hale." Sophie leaned on the railing beside him. "Then we don't stop looking." He turned to her, his voice gentler now. "You know, when this started, I thought you were just a waitress who stumbled into something too big." She smiled faintly. "And now? Now I know you're the reason I'm still standing." She looked out at the city, the reflection of the setting sun flickering in her eyes. "Funny. I was thinking the same about you." For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them was charged, heavy with the things neither had dared to say. Then Ethan broke the silence. "What will you do now?" Sophie exhaled. "I don't know. Maybe something quiet for once. But I can't go back to serving coffee and pretending the world's fair." "You could stay," he said. "Ward Enterprises needs rebuilding. Someone honest to help me clean it up." She studied him. "You trust me that much?" "I'd trust you with my life," he said simply. Her smile was small but genuine. "That's dangerous." "I know." A quiet laugh escaped her, breaking the tension. "All right, Ethan. Maybe I'll stay a little longer." They stood together as the last light faded, two people bound by chaos and resilience, survivors of a world built on lies. But for once, the lies had lost. Weeks passed. The scandal's noise began to fade, replaced by newer crises. Hale's empire was dismantled piece by piece, his assets liquidated, his influence evaporating. Vance's arrest led to a chain reaction of indictments across the corporate elite. Justice was slow, but it was real. Sophie took a permanent position as head of legal ethics at Ward Enterprises, a title she had never imagined holding again. She rebuilt the legal department from scratch, enforcing transparency policies, mentoring young lawyers, and quietly restoring integrity to the system that had once betrayed her. The media called her the Iron Whistleblower. She ignored the nickname but secretly smiled every time she heard it. Ethan, meanwhile, rebuilt his company in silence, his focus sharper than ever. Their partnership evolved into something wordless but constant, trust built through fire. They rarely spoke about Hale or Vance anymore. Some wounds didn't need reopening. But one cold morning, months later, Sophie found an envelope on her desk. No return address. Inside was a single line typed neatly on white paper. Winterline was only phase 1. Her pulse quickened. She called Ethan immediately. "We need to talk." Within minutes, he was in her office, reading the note with a grim expression. "Could be a bluff. Or a warning," she said. "Whoever's behind this, they're still out there." He looked at her, something steely in his eyes. "Then we do what we always do." Sophie tilted her head. "And what's that?" He smiled faintly. "We fight smarter." That night, the city shimmered below their balcony again, alive and restless. Sophie leaned on the railing, wind tugging at her hair. The memory of everything, Hale's smirk, Vance's betrayal, the courtroom chaos, flashed in fragments, then faded like ghosts. She had learned something through it all: the system was never truly clean. But as long as people like her and Ethan refused to bow, it couldn't win completely. She turned to him, her voice quiet but certain. "We started this because you lost a phone." He chuckled softly. "And you answered it. Guess some mistakes change everything." "Not mistakes," he said. "Fate." They shared a look that lingered, unspoken but undeniable, the kind of look born from shared scars and survival. The storm had ended, but its memory would never fade. Far below, the city lights flickered, millions of stories unfolding, millions of wars being quietly fought. And somewhere in that vast, humming web of power and deceit, another shadow was already rising. But Sophie Grant was ready. She wasn't the same woman who once hid behind a coffee counter, afraid of her own name. She was the woman who faced giants, and won. As the night deepened, Ethan raised his glass. "To truth," he said. Sophie clinked hers against his. "To fighting for it." And together, they stood in silence, watching the city that had nearly broken them, the city they now refused to let destroy anyone else. The reckoning was over. But their story had only just begun.